going to go ahead and get us started. This is the Clinical Consultation Network. Welcome, everyone. Of course, we do this every Tuesday at 12:30, and many of you participate each and every week. So glad to have you on here today. As I was just reflecting, I am going to be seeking your feedback today. I hope everybody will be warmed up and have their fingers at least warmed up to put things in the chat box, but also to come off chat and to just discuss things with us so that we can have a broad discussion today. We had something scheduled for today, but it got canceled. I can't remember what we had. Who was it that we had scheduled for today?
Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth.
Are we going to be able to get them back
Yes.
at some point? Okay.
Yes, we're going to reschedule.
That's great. Well, so with that though, with that cancellation today, we will talk about working toward a stronger network. And so we're the Clinical Consultation Network. Hopefully what we're doing over the course of time is getting stronger and better. And so that's what we're going to try to identify today, are ways to do that. Next slide. March 28th. That's next week. Well, I'll tell you what, it got to be March 28th really quick. But Dan Baker is going to be our guest next week. I'm so glad to have Dan as our guest. He's going to be on that fourth Tuesday NAD collaboration. Dan is a great author. He has authored several books on mental wellness. He is a great therapist. He's with the START program. He's just an all-around great guy. He's former president of NAD. I am now the president, but he is the past president. And so we're really glad to have as a guest with us next week, Dan Baker. So please tune in for that. Tell all your friends. Next slide. All right, today's Get Smarticle. So I'm going to talk to you about a few things here. This article is by Friedman, and she talked about here the relationship between participating in the community, significant support needs, and emergency department utilization. This comes from the Journal of Developmental and Physical Disabilities. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this article and as it relates to what we're going to discuss today. So what's happening? People with co-occurring mental health disorders and IDD have moved from institutions to the community. I think we're all aware of that. We've seen that. In some ways, our community has been better, has gotten better prepared over the course of time. In other ways, we're still lacking in a few areas that we need to try to improve upon. And so we have this, we've made this big commitment to put people, have them live within their communities. But now we have to go the next step of making sure that they have the supports around them to help them be successful in community living. Estimates of the prevalence of co-occurring diagnoses vary widely. As you've heard me repeat numerous times, the National Association for Dual Diagnosis estimates that 35% of people with IDD have a co-occurring disorder. You'll find studies that range anywhere from 0 to 80% out there. But this is sort of a pretty good average of all of those studies, that about 35% of people with IDD have a co-occurring mental health disorder. Nora Baladarian, I just want to point this out, in her 2013 article, pointed out that 70% of people with IDD report one or more adverse childhood experience. That's a pretty significant number. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the big contributing factors to these mental health issues that a lot of people with IDD experience is related to trauma, things that have occurred in their lives that now still have some impact on how they respond to things today. And then individualized, organized organizational supports. So that's a little bit of a buzzword from this article. Individualized organizational supports are identified as a key factor for success. All right, next slide. So when we talk about individual organizational supports, in this particular study, it was related to how people reported whether they had the mental health supports that they needed. So this was based on an interview done with persons supported to determine if they had those supports in place. Friedman in 2015 found that only 0.1% of 685,000 waiver recipients at that time were projected to receive mental health and behavior services. That's a pretty low number, 0.1%, 0.1%, not 1%. 1% would be 6,850. 0.1% be 685. I think I'm right on my math there. 685 out of 685,000. Maybe it's 6,850. Do my math for me, Carrie. Anyway, a small number of those were receiving those supports. The current study is designed to determine the impact of these individualized organizational supports. Next slide. 533 people with dual diagnosis who completed CQL's personal outcome measures were the study participants. You can see their demographics here. One of the things I might point out, a couple of things I might point out over here on the second column where it talks about guardianship. So it looks like about 25.2% of the sample were independent decision makers, 33.3 were assisted decision makers, 40% were full plenary guardian. They had a full plenary guardianship, what we call in Tennessee a conservatorship, but a full plenary guardianship for 40% of those in the study. I'm not sure what the other is, but it's other things beyond these. It might be power of attorney or something else of that nature. The residence type also for this sample, I think these are important variables. 60% were in provider-owned or operated homes. So this was primarily HCBS, home and community-based waiver services. 60% were in their own, were in a provider-owned or operated home. 17.1% were in their own home, 10.2 in a family home, and 3.1 in a host family or family foster care. ICF DD, ICFs, there were 2.9%, and then you can see what it was for others. And then they also broke it down by a primary method of communication. So 83.4% of the people in the study were primarily communicating verbally through spoken language. These other methods of communication were at a much lower rate in this particular study, but there are some conclusions reached based on these variables that I was just talking about. Next slide. So the personal outcome measures, now this is a tool that CQL uses. And for those of you who don't know, CQL stands for the Council on Quality and Leadership. Tennessee is the first state to have its department actually certified by, accredited by the Council on Quality and Leadership. So this is pretty significant that we've been able to accomplish that. But here are the things they look at when they evaluate a person's ability to participate in their community. First of all, do people use their environments? Do they go out and actually do things? Do they live in integrated environments, or are they isolated, into their home or into other groups of people with disabilities? Do people interact with other members of the community? So do they get out and actually have interactions with people? And then finally, do people participate in the life of the community? Are they part of it? Do they get to get up there and speak sometimes in front of people, or do they get to actually participate in a softball game? Are they part of a softball team, et cetera? Those types of things. Next slide. And then as it relates to the organizational supports, basically in this study, they were getting a description of the organizational supports that were available, and all variables were assessed as either present or not present for each participant. So all of those personal outcome measures, those were all assessed as either a 1 or a 0. 1 meant you had it, a 0 meant you didn't have it. Same for the organizational supports. Next slide. All right, so I think you went 2 slides ahead. Yeah. All right, so looking at the results here, people use their environments. It was interesting that the percent of the sample who used their environments is exactly the same as the percent of the sample who reported that they had organizational supports for that. So you can see that may have a strong impact. People live in integrated environments. 48% reported that they were able to do that. 44% of the sample stated that they had organizational supports that helped them to be able to do that. People interact with other members of the community. 56% had that. They do have the ability to interact with members of the community. 60% had the organizational support, reported organizational supports to be able to do that. So slightly less. You might have the supports to do it, but you might not accomplish it according to at least this number. And there could have been false positives and false negatives both ways, but you get the idea. People participate in the life of the community. 44% reported that they had that, and 58% had the supports to do it. So you would assume that some people have the supports, but continue to struggle in that area. All right, next slide. So what this boiled down to was that for each of these outcomes, that people who received the supports were more likely in each case to experience the positive outcome associated with that. So the people who used their environments were 112.78 times more likely to use their environments if they received supports, organizational supports to do that. For people living in integrated environments, the number was 136 times more likely if you received those supports that you would do that. People interact with other members in the community, 18.07%. So this is a bigger challenge, but people still were 18.07 times more likely to experience interactions with others in the community if they had the organizational supports to do that. And people participate in the life of the community, 35.93 was the number. Next slide. So a few other little things here based on some of those other variables that I talked about before. Independent decision makers had more community organizational supports in place than did those who had other forms of guardianship. So that's just an interesting finding, I think. People who primarily communicated through verbal communication had more community organizational supports in place than did those who used other forms of communication. And people who lived in their own homes had more community organizational supports in place than people who lived in provider-owned or operated homes, and for people who lived in ICF homes. So I think I've got some other references there. So I basically went over this article just to kind of get everybody oriented a little bit to what we're trying to discuss today, because I think a lot of what we're trying to accomplish is making sure that we have these organizational supports in place. And one of the things this study was a little bit vague on is exactly what those organizational supports need to be to help people. And that's really where I'd like a lot of our brainstorming to go today, is to try to figure out, all right, what do we have? What have we done that's good? And what we have missing? What do we have that we want to try to develop or set goals for? So I'm going to share my screen. Now you'll remember some time ago, we had a guest on CCN named Joe Patterson, who taught me a methodology for team building that I have used consistently since he taught that to me. And that's what we're going to do today. So what we're going to do is always start with the positive in this, right? We don't want to just dwell on what's not working out there, but we want to think about what is working, what we have accomplished so far. And so I'd like for everybody out there to just take a moment to ponder, what have we accomplished within this system over the course of your career? Whether you've been in here for a day or two, maybe if you've been in here for a day or two, you might not recognize everything. But if you've been with this system for a while, maybe you recognize some accomplishments that we've made. I'm just curious as to what people out there see as accomplishments in the system of supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have co-occurring mental health disorders. So my screen's showing right now, correct, Babs? So I'm going to try to take notes as we go along. If I don't get the notes exactly right, I'll go back. We'll go back and look at the chat. I'll get some information from Babs and others on the line here. But what do we see as accomplishments that have been made?
We're getting comments in the chat. Do you want people to come off mute or do you want me to read them?
Hey, Bruce, this is Salita. I have
Yes.
one
All
to
right.
just go ahead and throw out there as what I see to be a already pretty successful program, but definitely envision seeing a great deal more success coming out of it, and that is our MAPS program.
Okay. Tell me more about that, Salita.
Yeah, but I'm trying to I'm trying to get in my head. Medicaid Pathways to Independence, I believe is what program. Medicaid Pathways to Independence program. And that program is primarily targeted toward people who might be in the ages of wrapping up their high school experience and looking at the supports that may be available to them in the future as an adult, but are still in that age, in that age group of 16 to 22, I would say. And so the MAPS program is a diversionary program to offer supports and services to people greatly through a lot of our technology efforts that have been made through the department. And so the hope is that by equipping these people who are in this targeted age range, will learn skills toward independence that may divert them from ever needing to engage in long-term services and supports, such as waiver services.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. And I do think that at a future time we have scheduled for Jay Camperlino, or we're trying to get arranged for him to come on and talk about that program more on CCM. But I'm so glad that you brought that up today, because I am hopeful that that is going to be a program that's really going to help a lot of people who are in this situation that we're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Other accomplishments. If people are too shy to come off mute, Babs, you can read off some of their comments. Maybe I'll ask them to come on and explain a little bit further.
Okay, from Katie, we have closing institutions and recognizing diagnostic overshadowing.
Who said that?
Katie Klaus.
Katie, come on. You came off last week on here. Come off here again and tell me more about that, because I'm really interested in you talking a little bit more about diagnostic overshadowing.
So diagnostic overshadowing is the tendency for a physician, clinical staff to attribute someone's symptoms to their intellectual disability rather than to a mental illness. And just brushing off symptoms and saying, oh, they have an intellectual disability, that's the reason, and not looking any further into the symptoms.
So I'm very happy to hear that you're finding that has declined some, diagnostic overshadowing, that is.
I didn't say that it had declined. I said that we're recognizing it a little bit more.
Okay. You're recognizing it when it happens.
Yes.
Okay. I got you. Yeah. Because I think that seems like, I kind of feel like that's my whole job is trying to help people understand that this phenomenon occurs and that we need to avoid that. So that's great feedback. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the clarification on that too. Babs, what else we got?
The system is more person-centered, and we got that from a couple people.
All right. Got that one down there.
Hey, Bruce,
Yes.
I just wanted to point out in your first bullet point there, Libby Crockett clarified that MAPS actually stands for Medicaid Alternative Pathways to Independence.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Very good. I'm expecting other accomplishments here. What other accomplishments have we seen?
Well, I hate to say it about ourselves, but I will say that the establishment of 10 Start, I think, is a big accomplishment because, I mean, one aspect of that, other people can bring up other aspects, but really the focus on PERMA and increasing people's positive engagement in the world, you know, looking at like the deficits in what they're receiving, not just like the excesses of their behavior, I think is a shift that's happening, and it wouldn't be happening unless DIDD as a whole was supporting it. As far as 10 Start wouldn't exist unless the department was supporting sort of this shift to strengths-based, PERMA, and then obviously the biopsychosocial model. Others can say more. I know a lot of us are on here, but just opening the dialogue.
Carrie, I second all that. I was going to bring it up, but I thought, well, I'll wait to see if somebody from outside the IDD brings it up because I
Right.
know that
I tooted our own horn.
you know, I see the impact and the positive that it's bringing to people supported and their circles, family members and everyone around them. And so I just want to toot your horn with you.
Thank you, James. I don't feel so bad bringing us up myself with your support.
I'm just typing, so y'all keep listed while I'm typing.
Yeah, I did that too with the MAPS program. I mean, I think that's what we're doing right here is we are tooting our horns.
This is the point where you do toot your horns. Now, I hope we'll be able to also be self-examining when we get to the later portions of this, but this is the point at which we're identifying the high ground here. These are the things we've done that are good. And we'll get to the other stuff here shortly. Other accomplishments.
I think that bringing TEIS under DIDD was a great accomplishment. Also working with Children's Services, our Katie Beckett waiver. Our college programs, we've just got a lot of good things going on. And we shouldn't forget enabling technology. That's been great for a lot of people. And hopefully more people will access that in the future.
Yeah, I think what you're saying too, James, like the options are growing for people. And that's really what people out in the community need. They need options that fit their situation. And that's something to be proud of.
And Jamie, you mentioned you mentioned enabling tech, and I just blanked on the second program, the other program that you mentioned there.
Our college programs.
Oh, yeah,
She said
right.
Katie Beckett too.
Katie Beckett, and
I think it's beyond.
yeah, I'm glad. What's the name of that program? The college
Tennessee
program?
believes.
Say again.
Tennessee believes.
All right, great. Other accomplishments.
I think that just our department's entire focus on employment in general for the people we support is worthy of, a nod.
Glad you brought that up. One of my favorite phrases is there is no there is no BSP like a JOB. I think that makes a huge difference, and I'm very glad that we have that. Other accomplishments.
I just want a second. Kristen in chat pointed out increased awareness. I think, for those of us in the mental health field, we've been aware for a while, but I think with the pandemic, there was a lot more awareness of just mental health in general. So I think there is an increased awareness for, mental health needs within this population specifically. And I think that has led to more opportunities around education in that area of how this population, is impacted by mental health.
I agree with that statement, and I know that clinical services is doing a lot around co-occurring diagnoses, and it's also exciting to because when I first joined the state, mental retardation services was still with mental health, and I actually joined on when Title 33 was being revised, and they were separating those two populations. And to see, and I only know of it sort of tertiarily, of the joint efforts that are being made between the Department of Mental Health and our department, DIDD, to work together again to try to troubleshoot and problem solve and understand that the DIDD population, as it interacts with the mental health services system, is it's encouraging, and I think Ray King is doing a lot of wonderful things to try to bring those service systems together in a way that doesn't let people fall through the cracks.
And I would love to add to that better coordination between the IDD systems and the MCOs. When I started a long time ago, there was almost no communication between us. The MCOs wouldn't even talk to us. But now it has a whole different feel that it's more of a partnership than it used to be. So better coordination all around.
Excellent.
Similarly, Pathfinder has come a long way and is glad to have DIDD as a partner, as well as the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Department as partners. The website has really grown a lot, but we also have expanded our collaborations and partnerships with other agencies and departments.
I can't facilitate and talk at the same time, so y'all keep them coming. I'm just trying to keep up with the typing. I'll come back and clean these notes up later. All right, I'm going to shift this a little bit.
No,
I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Davis, Adrian. Um, I was thinking on another line, what has happened in my mind, we have a lot more family involvement where families are actually doing intakes, and you can see the volume of intakes coming in, and it's generated by families going online. They can call also. They do a very good job. Family members are assisting their family members with support from the department to locate jobs. And by that, I mean, it's a few families I work with. They have provided their family members that's receiving services, assistance in finding jobs, getting them to work. And one of them helped their family member learn how to drive. She is now driving herself to work. I met another family member that's working with her legislator to get specialized license plates. So police officers know that if someone with like autism or something, they may not respond as the same way, but that would trigger something to that officer, to proceed with caution if they're not responding the same way. That's a family member generating that. And I think the more we move with supporting families just with some support, and I actually a lot of contract providers doing it. If we can support families where they are, which we are now doing, that sounds good. And I like the crisis stabilization concept. To me, what that has done, we stopped sending people to hospitals, emergency rooms to take care of things that people really just need support where they are. And so I think we're approaching things a lot different from involving the community more and not totally focusing on contract providers to do that. That's really using community resources. So those are some of my thoughts there.
Thank you, Adrian. Very good stuff. All right, I'm going to move us along a little bit so we can get through this whole thing before 1:30. So I want to now ask you about strategies that are working, and there may be some overlap with some of the things we've already talked about here, but particular strategies that are working. I'm going to go ahead and list 10 Start as a strategy that I think is working out there, generally speaking. But we might like to talk about some specific aspects of Start that are working. So I wonder if anybody can make some contributions here with respect to aspects of Start that are helping or that are working for people.
I think going to the point that I think Adrian just made, the relationships we're building with like hospitals, CIT officers or police departments, that helps us divert people instead of sending them like, if there's nothing else to do but call 911 and take them to the ER, that's all they have. But we've given other options. So I think that helps. And there's a few in the chat. I will go ahead and I'm unmuted, so I'll go ahead and read them. Working as crisis intervention, that's from Phil, and I think that's great. And also getting more experienced BAs in the state is working.
All right, that's good stuff.
I want to add a working trauma-informed care. I think the focus on trauma and how it impacts people and taking that into account has been critical for helping people everywhere, honestly. It's not a new concept, but it's definitely gaining a lot more footing across disciplines lately.
It's not a new concept, but it's taken a long time for it to get into the consciousness of everybody out there, I think. And we're still working on that, I think, to some degree. But I agree. It has grown substantially recently. I think a lot more people recognize it. I'll just give a quick example. Going back to what happened with Damar Hamlin in the football game not long ago, where he had a heart attack on the field. I just think there was a lot more attention given in that situation to the trauma aspects of what had occurred there than there ever has been before. And so it is, I think, a great opportunity right now in society to be bringing these issues regarding trauma to the fore. The more we understand that, the better the system will become over time, no question about it. Other things that are working.
Bruce, I'll just chime in. I think part of this stems from the closing of all the institutions. I mean, you force the public and the private sector to start building together to create a system, to create a network, and you remove that crutch that used to be there.
So that's one that's probably going to result in some not workings also.
It is. I mean, it's a dual-edged sword, but I think it's
Yeah.
the right approach. I mean, because I think if we still had institutions, we would not be as far along as we are in other aspects of where we've come. Because we would still just say, well, we have institutions. You can just, drop your child, drop your loved one off here. We'll take care of them for the rest of their life. Have a nice day. But
Yeah, it's a challenge, but that we're into this challenge, and Tennessee is, gone into this challenge headlong with the closing of all of our institutions. And it is a huge challenge, but it is, I think, part of what is going to lead to our success is the fact that that's no longer an option. So
Yeah,
thank you for that.
it is working. I agree that it is working. I would also add, to what's working that we may not know yet. And that may also have a whole lot of not working along in the column alongside it, but we're on the cusp of moving into an integrated system of care where it kind of ties back to what we were saying about having more coordination with the MCOs. I'm hopeful. I'm very optimistic and hopeful that the integrated system of care is going to be something that works. But it's too soon to really have a lot of that information.
That is also one of our goals, to get to the integrated system of care. But
Mhm.
we're hopefully we're on our way now. All right. I'm going to go ahead and shift over to not working here. I'm sure there are other things that are working, but just to make sure we get through the format here, and I know people probably will be able to identify a few things that aren't working out there. So what's not working in this system?
I know there's some in the chat already, but I just want to throw in IDD education in clinical training programs in general.
There's
a gap in the not
that's a
working.
gap. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Tell me more about that, Michelle.
Just very minimal, if any, IDD training for clinical programs at any level, graduate, undergraduate level. Physicians, the medical field gets very little IDD training. So I think on the health side in general, whether it's mental health, physical health, there's just a big gap in IDD education in those training programs.
Okay. Thank you for that. What else is not working?
We got lack of income-based housing in the chat.
Housing has become a huge issue.
And then we also
And,
got lack of DSP level staff on all levels from consumer direction to agency level.
Huge systemic issue, the ability to get direct support professionals.
I think there's a lack of resources for people with IDD for having access to appropriate treatment on the mental health side, whether that's inpatient, whether that's clinicians who work with the population. I think there's just a lack in general there.
Let's see, who is that? That's psychiatrists,
Therapists,
mental health counselors,
Inpatient.
psychologists.
inpatient and outpatient services.
And agreeing with that, but also more specifically, you cannot identify ones who have the experience and background to do it. It's very difficult to find, someone who is putting out there that they have a good amount of experience in training, working with autism or working with D.
I'm not a horrible typist. I'm not great, but at taking notes, but I'm not
You're
horrible.
good. You're doing great.
It's hard to type when people watch, I've found. Makes
And
it
I'm
harder.
doing it. I usually have that difficulty, but I'm not having that difficulty today for some reason. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying these notes are perfect, but all right. What else is not working out there?
On the closing of institutions piece, I would say that we are still, there is an issue with restricted egress. And
Okay.
it's really the only flaw that I've had experience working with so far, and with the closing of the institutions, and that we are putting people in community settings who have elopement issues, who they could potentially pose risk of harm to self or others, and yet by taking them out of institutional settings, we're saying we're not going to put locks on doors that they don't know how to unlock, or barriers on windows that they cannot, if the person cannot safely and or by choice exit the home, is that person centered? And I don't know, Michelle, if you want to add anything to that or correct me if I might have misspoken about that, but it does seem to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just generalize it more to say I think there are still situations where keeping people safe is still something that we're trying to navigate and balance with dignity of risk, and ensuring that that person is able to live the life that they want to live for themselves, even if we don't always agree with it.
I'm
Yeah, I
gonna chime
broadened
in
that.
here.
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna chime in here too.
Yeah, please do.
Not because I really wanted to speak, but because I'm driving and I'm not sure how to articulate it. But it's related to what you two just said. I feel like I think it's related to Michelle saying earlier about education too. I think there's a lack of understanding in community supports and systems. So like the legal system, law enforcement, therapeutic supports, of what those limitations are and where the boundaries are and what is person-centered and appropriate in this day and age. Because I've just had some interactions where it doesn't seem that all are knowledgeable that those types of locked institutions have been closed and that those resources are not available, and that other options need to be considered, if that makes sense. I don't think there's an understanding of where we're at with services.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move us now to talk a little bit about goals. And I don't want anybody to think this is supposed to be a complete discussion of this, because this is sort of just a little bit of a springboard, I think, for things I want to move forward with. And one of the recommendations of the Policy and Planning Committee for the state made was for us to consider putting together a work group or some sort of a group to understand these issues more extensively. And so this is sort of be using this as a little bit of a springboard for that, but we don't have to get everything in this 1 hour. of discussion. There's certainly a lot more content that we could get to. I'd just say, based on what we've identified here that's not working, what would be some goals that folks would see for where we should go next? What should we be trying to do in these areas?
Bruce, this is Salita. On the touching back to the lack of DSP staff, it seemed like back when I was involved with the planning and policy councils, there was discussion about a curriculum that would create a pathway for DSPs to gain certifications or higher levels of Bill, maybe you can help me out here. But like an echelon of training where they could garner higher wages based on how they proceeded through that curriculum. Does that sound right, Phil?
Yeah, there's been some initiatives that have been worked on throughout the years to try to find ways to give special training. One of it came through the University of Minnesota through what was known as quilts, and that kind of has stopped. There's some focus right now from TennCare about engaging the National Association of DSP certification program. The thing about that is it is kind of a lengthy thing, and it's pretty costly to do anything with your DSPs through that, even though it's really good, I'm sure. And, you know, so there was some work done by one of the regions, I think, to build a handbook perhaps that could be used for some training. I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, it might have been a little bit more general in nature, but the kind of thing that I am seeing that's helping tremendously is simply introducing concepts such as trauma-informed care, and introducing some things that once upon a time, when we had a structure of ample behavioral analysts around, and people had an analyst pretty much on every team, those folks were doing a lot of educating our DSPs about how to specifically work with people with challenges. And that's kind of not as handy as it used to be, but just about any kind of information specifically related to why a person is behaving this way or is presenting these challenges, anything helps at this point. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I know.
Well, it sounds like from a goal-oriented perspective that's something we could at least put down. That would be a way to address this crisis. I also work on or I'm involved with our policy exemption review process. And we thought several years ago that by not requiring agencies to yearly request exemption for staff that they have on a hire who may have findings on their background reports. And so the decision was made that unless a new finding came up on a background report, the exemption was valid for the person's duration of employment with the agency, unless something new came up. And we really thought we would start seeing a decrease in the number of exemption requests related to background check reports, and that has turned out to not be the way it turned out. We still have the same number of background requests, even though they're good for the duration of employment with the agency. So I was trying to think in terms of something that could be a viable goal to address.
I may have gotten a little bit lost there, Salita, just to make sure I understand. Are you saying, do we need to have more, be able to kind of broaden our idea of who might be an acceptable employee? Is that what you're saying, or am I just totally off base with what you were?
You're not off base. It's my fault for not being clear because I'm also trying to read the chat.
Oh,
What I guess what I'm suggesting as a goal is that we incentivize our DSP staff, like that we've got to have some way to incentivize, you know, because even though wonderful things have been done to increase their salaries, still it's not a huge income.
well,
And
it's
so
not
if
just,
there was some
yeah.
kind of a program that could allow for some upward mobility for these people who are working on the front lines, I mean, that could be a goal.
That's a great thing. And I will say this too. One of the things we were talking about training up here too, trying to incentivize people, but that was one of the things identified in that article I just read as a way of increasing and incentivizing direct support professionals is by providing them more training.
Yeah, everybody wants to feel like they're capable and qualified, and I kind of suspect that not all of our DSPs may have that confidence.
Yeah.
Dr. Davis, this is Andrew speaking. I'm a 10-star coordinator for Nashville.
Yes, sir.
Something that came to my mind as Salita was speaking, just today I provided a CSE PIP training for an agency, and I want to tell you 100% of the time, and I'm not exaggerating by this, whenever I'm done the training, they tell me, wow, I really wish I learned about this earlier, or learned about these diagnoses, or, this criteria from the DSM-5, because it's true. They don't have a lot of experience in this field and understanding. And something that I would love to see with 10 Start is being involved with the agency's onboarding process and orientation so that we can be involved in training DSPs, helping them understand psychiatric diagnosis, the biopsychosocial methods, and et cetera. But also, as Salita has said, a way to boost their confidence, because I believe that that could be the incentive. If they have a full, better understanding of what these diagnoses are, they might have more confidence and capability of doing their jobs. So agencies that's with us right now, I can't name them, but agencies that we are working with, like that's who we can start with. Work with this agency, being a part of their onboarding process, and just provide the training with what we provide already with the individuals that we serve.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Andrew. That I think that's a great point. And we do need to more and more make this part of the fabric of what everybody is getting as they come in, because honestly, if people could understand more about trauma-informed care, it really revolutionizes the way you approach someone. And it's so important, I think, for people to be getting that. And we do need to get that out there more. These are some great goals, some great discussion here today. I can always count on the network to come through on these things. Babs, I hope can you save the chat? Because I'm not sure I got everything, and I want to make sure we get everything. And what we'll do also is build on this initial, what we found here initially, and keep having this discussion a little bit as we go along. And so I just want to say thank you to the network for your assistance in this. I hope we'll be able to continue this discussion. And of course, please be with us next week, as Dan Baker is going to be our guest on the Clinical Consultation Network. Again, should be a great interview with him. I appreciate you all being here. See you next Tuesday at 12:30 Central Time.
Thanks, Bruce.